Let's summarize the module. And clearly, the thing that's most important here is to understand that all these device communications with Web API backends are discoverable. It's trivial. So as we discussed, there's a couple of ways that you might do this. And the one we saw firsthand was Fiddler. Proxying data through Fiddler, especially with rich client apps running on devices like iOS, really is trivial. And it tells us a lot about what the app is doing. Remember apps like Foxtel and Evo and Red Bull. Huge amounts of data going backwards and forwards. A couple of years ago, I actually wrote a blog post called Secret iOS Business, and it looked at the sort of really highly inefficient communications that many apps were having with web servers. And I pointed out that one of these apps was downloading huge images. The resolutions were significantly higher than what they were ever used. They only needed to be thumbnails, yet they were thousands of pixels wide. And I actually ended up speaking to the developer of this app. And you know what he told me about why the images were so large? He said, well, that's the way we were given them. So he hadn't actually thought through the process of simply resizing them, choosing an optimal format, compressing them a little bit. Things that were so basic. And yes, we see this happen in web apps as well, but as with security, when you push that inefficiency back behind the veneer of a rich client app, it's just so much harder to identify. It might feel a little bit slow, but there's no dev tools to simply look at response sizes or the ability to right-click on the image and look at the properties of it. So I thought that was an interesting little anecdote that might shed some light on why we see these inefficiencies in apps. Of course, the other thing that we looked at with Fiddler is using filters so that we could keep out the data that we don't need. So turning off capturing so that traffic from the host doesn't appear in Fiddler. Using those filters to just select the host that we want. And of course, there are other filters in Fiddler that also help you exclude the data that you don't need. That was Fiddler. Of course, the other thing is that there are other means of intercepting the traffic from other devices. So you can still man in the middle your bathroom scales if they talk over HTTP. Maybe using something like a Wi-Fi pineapple and just dumping all those packets. Then of course, if it's a wired device with an Ethernet connection, something like a LAN tap, it could be a throwing star LAN tap from Hak5, for example. Or for any of those devices, using ARPA poisoning. It's trivial to get in the middle of that traffic. And finally, and perhaps most significantly, all of these HTTP, and as we'll see later, HTTPS communications are discoverable. And not only are they discoverable, but we can intercept them, we can read them, and as we'll also see later, we can manipulate them. And that in particular is very significant when it comes to mobile security. So I hope this module has given you a good intro into how we can start getting our hands on that traffic. Let's now move on to the next module and start actually compromising the security of an application that's implemented vulnerable APIs.